Hey, welcome to Frontline Dispatches on Organizing Upgrade, a show dedicated to spotlighting the most urgent left organizing and activism happening around the country and beyond for racial and economic justice, and much more. And stay tuned for future episodes of Frontline Dispatches every Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern, at 6 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Pacific. My name is Montague Simmons. I'll be today's host. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, please leave comments and chats. We'll be monitoring these as the show goes on. And if you haven't yet, please give Org Upgrade a like and subscribe to this channel on YouTube. And finally, to stay up to speed with all of the amazing content coming out of Organizing Upgrade, sign up at our website to hear about upcoming events, videos, articles, and more about left strategy for organizers. So let's jump into it. So for over 25 years, Saul Sarabia has participated in social movements that seek to transform society. He works to end structural racism and discrimination of all kinds by developing leaders, teaching, and engaging in collective action. To change laws, since 2003, he's actually trained residents and students to fight injustice by partnering them to work for social change. Together, they've challenged racism in the Gulf Coast after Katrina, supported formerly incarcerated people to build power, to change laws that discriminate against them, and helped undocumented college students build a voice and a social movement. Saul, welcome to Frontline Dispatch.
Thanks so much, Montega. It's great to be here.
We're glad to have you. So, just to set the ground, for like the last 5 or 6 years in the wake of this honestly emerging movement for Black lives and resistance, we've seen electoral engagement take root as a strategy for both building power and to reduce harm in our communities. One of the strategies that we've seen winning in cities around the country has been a push to both end cash bail and decarcerate jails. By extension from that, we've also seen organizations begin to work to elect progressive attorneys as district attorneys, county prosecutors, sheriffs, all in an effort to advance their own demands around decarceration. In 2020 alone, we've seen campaigns, one to defend the first wave of prosecutors like Kim Foxx in Chicago, Kim Gardner in St. Louis, and then a whole new wave come out of cities like Detroit, New Orleans, and LA, where you played a crucial role in the successful campaign of George Gascon. So before we jump in deep, would you just take a few minutes to kind of tell us about yourself and how you actually got activated into movement work?
Sure thing. Thank you for that. I think the most important thing to share is that I, like many other folks of color who have been drawn into the movement building that you described, was directly impacted by the war on drugs. My background goes to my parents are both immigrants from a part of Mexico that is currently and has been for the last several decades trapped in the choice between migrating or staying and participating in the supply side. People that used to, my great-grandparents, my grandparents, great-grandparents, all, basically planted seeds and, ate off the land. And this is all an area in Mexico where if you're not with the cartels now, you either get killed or you leave. And so my parents land here and they raised their 5 children in the inner city neighborhoods of Los Angeles. And during the 70s, when I grew up, and in the 80s, we saw the structural impacts of the larger political economy of this drug trade that Mexican elites, the American elites all benefit from, impact us in another way, which was that due to the limited choices and the underground economy of drugs in neighborhoods like the one I grew up with, I saw brothers and sisters go into addiction. Both my brothers were locked up while I was in college. And just seeing the disastrous impact of the war on drugs, not only in not ending this issue, but also realizing that it was the root cause of so much of what we were facing here. And so when I became the only person in my family to go to college, the one thing that I was interested in is how to use that education to advance the work that could address these conditions in our families and in our neighborhoods. And so I discovered organizing. I became a student activist, and luckily, a few years out of school, I was trained officially as a community organizer in an organization created by Karen Bass, who's now the head of the Congressional Black Caucus, organizing Black and Brown folks in South LA to change laws and policies that affect their day-to-day lives. So that's how I got into movement, and then specifically zeroing in on this new Jim Crow and the impact of the use of the courts and the use of caging as a way to extend the legacies of colonialism, of slavery. I was fortunate enough to have some background in critical race theory when it was first emerging, and I decided I wanted to be at the center of praxis of how to bring a framework that was telling us not to believe the lies about why racism didn't exist, or that it had been defeated or anything like that, and do some work, and ended up organizing people who are formerly incarcerated to get involved in the policymaking process. And that's what brought me into this journey.
Okay. So like your bio listed, you've been doing this work for 25 years, and 25 years actually offers a lot of perspective to this moment of transformation. And I know locally, looks like we may have lost him for just a minute. He'll be back shortly. The 25 years offers a lot of perspective for this transformation. And I want to hear from you like more about LA and what made this very moment like right to challenge Jackie Lacey, who also happens to be the first Black DA in LA County. What made this right to wage this fight?
I really appreciate this question, because everybody wants to get into just the details of how Gascon is going to do this, and I think it's important to think about and anticipate what's coming up. But one of the things in critical race theory is the absolute centrality of historicizing and contextualizing in the way that you are asking now. I would like to answer that question and propose that we think about the baking in of structural racism into our county government and the creation of the world's largest jailing system in our county jail system in three different boxes. The first one is the early history of building a county government that was essentially at the service of white supremacy, and building out of an infrastructure where through racial gerrymandering, people of color couldn't even participate. It took lawsuits in the early 90s, for example, for the part of LA that I was describing that I grew up in, to not be divided up, for them to create a district in which the brown vote in a city, which is the most Mexican city outside of Mexico City, could elect our first elected official. While they were doing the racial gerrymandering and the structural exclusion for political participation in shaping county government, they were also using our tax money to build out one of the most vicious and brutal systems of policing in our LA County Sheriff's Department. And that, even though it's its own elected office, I think all I can say to you is that our previous sheriff right now, and 7 or 8 of his highest officers are all sitting in federal prison.
Wow.
The level of corruption that was going on, and this was when he was elected, he was considered the new age, Lee Baca. He went to the same junior high school that I went to many years before I do. He was considered the new age pro-reform guy, and he's sitting in a federal prison for nothing short than feeling so powerful that he would actually, not only hide the abuse of inmates, but they actually went after the FBI that was investigating this. I mean, this is why you see one of the rarest things in our movement, which is cops ending up in prison, which is that they felt they had such a level of power, him, Tanaka, and all those people, that when they realized that the FBI was investigating them, they actually went and knocked on the door of the agent in LA and just said, "We're watching you."
You know, it's like a bad Netflix film, but it's I think that first phase of our history is just, you know, we need to pause for a second and recognize that when Kelly Lytle Hernandez, who's, you know, one of the scholars who studies all of this and says this is the city of inmates, it's basically that coming together of mass incarceration, mass criminalization, and racial exclusion, and the absolute disregard for the poor people that the county gets $30 billion a year to whose lives they've governed, right? They govern the lives of poor people. If you have to deal with the county, you're basically in the misfortune of being on probation, on welfare, in the foster care system. This is what they do.
Wow.
The second phase, I would say, has to do with the pre-BLM moment, where some of the architects of the national movement that we can count as neighbors here in LA really took on the Board of Supervisors and said, this agency is rogue, and we need to create oversight over them, and we need to bring some sunlight into the abuses happening to our people in there. And to this, I'll want to definitely shout out Patrice Cullors, Mark Anthony, the folks from Dignity and Power Now. This was work that they really pushed the county to recognize, and it was a pre-LM moment where the culmination of that was that our county government, the Black and brown officials at the time who were realizing the failure of the governance model, agreed to create an oversight body that didn't have any subpoena power and that were not prepared to come at the sheriff and to do these things. And so they did something that I think the Gascon committee, the Gascon campaign, anybody watching the Progressive Prosecutor Victory in LA has to know, which is the movement went and collected signatures to put a measure on the ballot to give subpoena power, amongst other things, to this oversight body without teeth that the electeds had created. And I think that the county inadvertently gave us the infrastructure to do something that in my 25 years I never thought we could do, which was a movement-led electoral mobilization and victory in a county of 15 million people. For any movement to try to knock off any incumbent, pass a measure in favor of things that we like, it's just it was not even fathomable. That was called Measure R. It won by 70% of the vote.
Jeez.
Montague, 70% of the vote by something that organizers, not lawyers from the ACLU, put together, went and got the signatures from. That coincides with the killing of Trayvon Martin, the formation of BLM, and BLM being shrewd enough to say, we've got to take some of this energy and do electoral work. And that was the first big victory. I think we cannot discount these two first phases before we then talk about when the BLM movement began to target Jackie Lacey and to say, we as Black people do not want base identity politics. We want real transformative change. And if it's going to matter that she's the first woman, and if it's going to matter that she's the first Black person, it should be reflected in things like not pursuing a death penalty where everybody's Black or brown, or not pursuing it at all. And all of the demands that became the precursor for the moment that the George Floyd tragedy happens, for us to have something to point all of the people who weren't watching to as a solution, which is, we got to take out this DA. We got to show that the community can come together, connect the dots, and focus on this race to take her out.
So wait, I'm sorry. I want to make sure we're highlighting this moment. Like, it's important that folks know, like, when we've seen successes in these campaigns, it's been successful because coalitions of organizations like this come together to strategically align their message, their engagement, and the way they're actually talking to communities to win. So this is textbook. And if you're watching the show on Facebook, YouTube, please take a moment to enter your questions. We're here to engage you, and we want you to feel like you're being heard. But it sounds like, so the structure was built before the actual campaign was formed. So I'm sorry, I didn't want to like stop you, but I want to make sure folks see the value in that. So please keep going for page 3.
Absolutely. No, and I just want to say that you asked me to make sure that we talked about the conditions, and as organizers, we always talk about, right, ensuring that we are contributing to create the conditions by which both our movements are capable to come in and offer a concrete solution, right? A sort of immediate way to onboard and on-ramp people as their consciousness expands, and also to be able to offer some way to show people what the long-term vision is, right? And that these things are connected. And so I do think that it's important to, I don't know that the official campaign would tell the story in the way that I just told you, because I live in LA County. My first organizing campaigns in South LA were aimed at county agencies that were responsible first for the families on welfare that were impacted by Bill Clinton's 1996 welfare reform.
Wow.
Then the relatives who were caring for the majority of the children in the foster care system, who were basically children of the people that were incarcerated. And so we were having to do campaigns that said, why is all the money going to the group homes on the back end instead of to the black and brown grandmothers in South Central who have the majority of the kids? And then eventually organizing people that were under the jurisdiction of probation and the courts to say, we should be able to work. And this question about criminal records on job applications by the county discriminates against us. All of those campaigns, ban the box, supporting family care, not foster care, all of those to me are important precursors that prepared the soil for somebody like Gascon and his team of folks who had their own record, had his own connection to these issues, to come in and to work with movement to be able to produce something that was unheard of in LA, which is to not just knock off a sitting incumbent, but somebody who had so much money from the police unions. And I think your question about that sort of third step, like, so then what did happen in this latest history is really key to tying into your first question around what was really going on and what did it look like in LA County way before. I want to share that you referenced some of the other cities. Obviously, Philadelphia is another place where when Larry Kress, and I'm going to say it, where Black Lives Matter and a bunch of other groups did what you just mentioned, which is to make viable the progressive prosecutor who got elected there.
He has to be defended this year, 2020. Well, next year, 2021. That's right.
Yeah, and I think that we're going to be seeing that here, right? Like already, all of the guns are getting pointed, and all of the prep is being done to be able to essentially, make this a one-term progressive prosecutor moment. So I see that there's a question about the messaging in the Gascon campaign and how community folks were mobilized. And I want to just say this is one of the rarest moments in my involvement in any electoral campaigns. And as a left organizer, the kind of skepticism we have about the electoral system and about individuals who want to be in office. And that's a healthy skepticism that should always be a point of departure. But the Gascon campaign, I think it's important to know, came to the election very late. We had a March primary. California moved its primary from June to March and wanted to have a big impact on the national scene. That's why they moved it up early. Gascon did not announce until November. Wow. And he ran in November to try to push her into a runoff against another very formidable woman of color, public defender that got a good amount of votes. Because let's face it, you're a progressive. If you have an alternative who's advocating for the same things, and she's not a former cop, which Gascon is, a lot of people said, I will never vote for a former LAPD officer who was in the system, right, in those early periods. So he barely made it into the runoff. And that part of the campaign, I believe, was essentially in the behind the scenes, a moment where he came to many movement actors and said, I am at the tail end of my career. I will do this only if you all feel like this can be in service of what you all have been doing, and it will be productive. And it was, I think, that the internal messaging to movements that allowed people to warm up to the idea of working with the former cop. I just want to say that also personally, right? The external messaging, I think in the beginning, Lacey only got pushed into a runoff by 1% of the vote. And I think that if the George Floyd moment hadn't happened after that primary, I think even with our help, Gascon would have had a lot of trouble. Because what the George Floyd moment was able to do was to name as legitimate the impunity and the complicity of the courts and the entire legal system with the murder of Black people and people of color. And so I think that if you look at the messaging that came out of admitting that the system was racist, admitting that these laws that were in place were designed to do exactly what they're doing, that this became messaging that was something that probably would have been difficult for people to either hear, or that we would have been fighting with people in the campaign to say, if the Floyd moment hadn't happened. You asked me to talk a little bit about the movements and how we did come into relationship with this campaign. I want to tell you that soon after March, I just personally made a decision to go to Gascon and people around his campaign that were asking about getting people like myself who had been doing this kind of work excited, and to say there is insufficient grassroots ownership of your campaign by longtime movement leaders who have been doing this work before you. And if you want to win, and we want you, we need to take out Jackie Lacey from that position. You need to give us ownership, more meaningful ownership of this campaign. And to his credit, and the Black woman who the campaign manager, Jamara Hayner, I'll give a lot of credit to. She created space for folks like me and Xiomara, who's part of your show, to come in and to essentially guide the relation building between various sectors of social justice movements in the largest county in the country. And I think that this articulation between social justice actors who are clear that elections matter and that these are directly tied to what we're trying to win, and a campaign that could, at least, up until now, show the humility to be able to say, you're right, you all tell us what we need to do and resource and take the lead. That's what made a big difference, I think, in why we were able to get so many people to turn it around, along with, let's just be clear, the fact that BLM had a standing demand to take Jackie Lacey out of that position, and that the George Floyd moment allowed that to become popularized. I think those two things were really important.
Amazing. Okay, I want to take a second for our listeners again. I know we only have like 5 minutes left, but if you're listening to us on Facebook, on YouTube, please take a second to drop a question in the box. This is a rare opportunity to talk to somebody who is deeply involved in the campaign for LA reform, and they're winning and teaching us how to move about this. Before we get to the very tail end, one thing that's become very clear is when we do win, enemies come out of the woodwork. So I'm curious, in the wake of the immediate victory, like what is it that you're beginning to see? Like I know in St. Louis, like there was a whole group of prosecutors that immediately joined the police union in the wake of Wesley Bell's victory. Like
Wow.
who are the ones that are beginning to show their heads? And what kind of tailwinds are you expecting? What do you expect to be running into as you begin to really make transformation happen?
Absolutely. So you know that we know that the biggest donors to Jackie Lacey's campaign were the police and prison guards union. Um, we know that the union of the DAs also were actively trying to ensure this that Gascon did not get elected. Um, I have learned a phrase in dealing with our county government, and that is the influence of the county family. The county family it includes the other departments that are all stewards of structural racism, whether they like it or not. And that is because they've been embedded in a culture where all of these things that he's doing were normalized. All of a sudden, it's shocking to them that somebody who is at the highest prosecutorial role would say the role of the gang database has been proven to be a vehicle by which to claim that young men of color are criminals, and we will not use it. And
Mm,
we will not take information that cops give us based on that to pursue convictions. In fact, we're going to go back and give people a chance to be free if they had an enhancement, a gang enhancement put on them. This is radical to them, but as you and I both know, there's nothing radical about doing something that should be so obvious. But if you're a public defender, if you're a prosecutor, if you're a judge, you've all been participating in this with the police, right? So it's not
right.
just the police and the police union, it's all these other actors. And so just yesterday, there was a story about there is some pushback, obviously within the office. We already knew that that was going to happen, but even public defenders saying things like, it shouldn't be this Gestapo-ish in terms of them being asked to fill out a survey to inform the campaign. Are there judges who are, resisting what we're trying to do, and are there DAs in particular that are going in and not pursuing what were our executive orders, so that we could know what to make of that? And of course,
Mm,
one of the pathways is to get involved in judicial elections, and people calling the naming of an elected judge who's against these things, and and the specter of actually running people against them as a Gestapo tactic is absolutely crazy to me. Crazy.
absolutely. Absolutely. So we do have one question that did come through. I want to make sure I pose that to you, and just be mindful that we are getting close to our time. We've got a few minutes. Max Elbaum asks, how do you see your actual relationship with Gascon unfolding from here? I know, like after they become DA, things can change.
They can. And so one of the things that what we were able to do, Max, this is a great question, is to begin a conversation as a point of departure where we began to sort of scaffold in different points of engagement. The first one was to go from we want to have more grassroots ownership of your campaign to we want to co-govern with you when you get in office. And the response from the campaign to that was, and from Gascon directly, was, I cannot accomplish what I want to accomplish without actually bringing hardcore activists along and movement groups along, because I'm going to get opposition from all sides. So co-governance as a minimum. Then we began to talk about we want to have community informed decision making about the things that you're doing, which led us to do things like bringing in the longtime activists who were already working on juvenile justice, directly influencing the first executive orders. For example, writing some of them that said things like, January 1st, we're getting rid of the truancy unit. It's gone. There's
Wow.
there's no purpose for it except to be a school to prison pipeline. And so I think for us left organizers, it's about doing two things: getting past our reservations around being in the cesspool of governing in institutions like county government that are steeped in structural racism, and also being able to push that we want a seat at the table, not just when it comes to elections.
Wow. This has been amazing. So thank you for making time for us today.
Thank you.
To our audience, if you enjoyed the video, please stay up to speed with all the amazing content coming out of Organizing Upgrade. Sign up at our website to hear about upcoming events, videos, articles, and about left strategy. Again, so thank you for making time to join. Do you have any last thoughts that you want to share as we close out?
I think, first of all, just taking a moment to celebrate all of the work that everybody is doing on this front, including yourself, across the country, and inviting all of us to keep this communication going about our lessons learned in each of our various jurisdictions, and knowing that 2021 is going to be what we make it out to be now that we've had this very important reckoning and point of departure for the next level of our work.
Thank you, Saúl. And thank you to all who joined us today. Thank you to our guests, Saúl, and thank you to the production team at Organizing Upgrade. Please join us again next week, same day, Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Pacific. My name is Montague Simmons. Thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you, Montague. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.